Now that we've been learning how to use our brush to mix paint and create paint layers, okay, thin, transparent, opaque, that's going to be very important in the future to think about how we're painting the layer. We're going to use that to now mix a system of values. So we have to start understanding values of the light and dark quality of the color we're using. But in this case, we'll continue using the black and white so we can just focus on that idea and not worry about color. Later, we're going to get into the whole color issue. So I'm going to take, once again, my black, I'll put it over here. And then my white on the other side. Now you notice I'm putting it at the top of my palette because this is all my mixing area. So when I keep my paints at the top here, so I have an organized way of working with this. Okay, so next step is to start a mixing. Now what we're going to mix is a 6 value scale. And artists will think of value in different ways. Sometimes they have like a 4 value scale or a 5 value scale. But we're going to use a 6, and later I'll show you why we're thinking that way. And there isn't one perfect method, but the main idea is to understand a range of values in segments so you can identify when you're mixing paint, what value are you mixing the paint at. So we'll start with a middle gray, but actually it's a little better if I want to keep the color a little lighter, I start with white. So I put some black there, but I'll bring the white into here. So I have to think on this scale, I'm going to go all the way from darker values to lighter here. So the concept is that there's intervals between the lightness and darkness of the value. I'm going to put this one about here for now, but that could change a little bit as I mix up more color. And, this can seem a little bit tedious, but this is exactly what you want to be doing to understand the value of the color as you paint it on there. And of course, there's no color with this, it's just black and white. Okay, so you can see this is a black, and then we have a gray, a dark gray here. So there's 2 values there. And then over here, we'll step a little lighter of our darks. So it has to be enough different than the ones next to it, so you can see the difference. But at the same time, you don't want to jump out of what would be the appropriate interval. You want to stay within that interval. So that's not too bad. And this is pretty good here. So I'll come over here. Now the theory is that this is our whitest white over here. But in a painting, you're always going to have a little bit of value there. It probably won't be pure white because that looks so neutral. It almost doesn't look like it's part of the painting. So now I'll come here, take just a tinge of the black. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6. Okay, 6 values. Okay, so now we have a 6 value scale of paint, and we're going to paint that onto our paper here. So I'm going to just make a series of shapes, 6 basically kind of squarish rectangle shapes. I want to make sure they're going to fit in here. So I'll start with the 2 like I did. And then I have 1, 2, 3 on this side, and 1, 2, 3 on this side. And it isn't important that these are super perfect because when we're painting, we're not trying to be that geometric, perfectly geometric. Okay, so here's our different values. So we're just going to go ahead and paint those in. And we're going to paint them in like we did our other shapes previously. So I'm going to use a brush here. Notice the size of the brush. So that allows me to kind of work and create the shape, but at the same time, I have a fairly wide brush. So I'm not just using a little small brush and trying to paint it in like a coloring book. So we want to think of marks we're making are brush marks, not pencil marks or, a small implement. It's mainly we're brushing it down there and we're trying to do it with a minimal amount of strokes as we can, not to overwork or make it look too busy. Okay, now the other thing is that if I want this to dry, let's say by tomorrow, overnight, roughly, oil paint doesn't totally dry overnight. It actually takes to really completely dry. It can actually take quite a bit of time, but to be dry to the touch, so I can paint over it. Then I can use my uh, Galkid gel medium. This will definitely, if I use this, it will be dry by tomorrow, which is handy because then if you have a lot of these pieces of paper or canvas paper and you have all wet paint, you're always a little bit concerned. So what I can do is use the gel here, but I also could use a little thinner if I wanted to make a little thinner. So remember, this is going to be, we're just going to think of this as an overall layer. So it doesn't have to be a super thick layer, but we don't want it transparent either because we want to see the value. So we'll use a little bit of thinner, bring it in here, makes the paint brushable. I already brought some of the dryer in here, and I'll just go ahead and paint this in. Okay, so see, I'm just using these strokes. It's about 4 strokes, and I paint in that value. Now, as you go along here, you're going to have to clean your brush so that the value on your brush doesn't affect the next value because you're really trying to separate these values. So first thing I can do, I've got all this super dark on here, I would pull off as much as I can of the paint to start with. Then I would come into my thinner or my solvent and I'd clean off what I can like that. Now that's going to be pretty clean. So when you're painting, as long as you get the bulk of the paint off your brush and you're switching colors, you're going to be okay because the little bit that's going to affect the next color is not going to be that important unless it's like a bright yellow or really intense color you want to keep intense. Then you really got to clean more of your brush so when you paint that, it's not dulling the paint. Okay, so but this would be like about right. Okay, so I'll get a little more medium here and then add a little more thinner just to make it a little more brushable. Paint it in. Okay, as I use up my brush strokes, I gotta go back and fill my brush up again. It takes a fair amount of the medium or the solvent to break the paint down so that you can make brush marks. So this is one of the difficulties as we do painting is that even the interval between reaching down your palette and to the paper, you have to consider the amount of paint on your brush. If you've got enough paint mixed up, and you have to stop and redo things if there's not enough paint there for you to paint with. Okay, so bring the medium in my next value, add the solvent, Go back. I got to get enough paint on my brush. Okay. pull off the paint. Pull paint out. A little more solvent. Come to the next value. Get enough medium and a little bit of solvent in there to make it move along. Okay. Wipe off the paint. Get more paint off with the solvent. Come into the next color. Okay, just like so. And then the last will be the white. And as I mentioned before, I'll break this down, add a little solvent. But this, I'm not going to expect it to be pure white. A little bit. So I'll bring a little bit of this other paint into it. So you can see it's not as white as the paper, so that's fine. Okay, so now there's my 6 value scale. And then what we can do is do the same thing, but with organic shapes. It can be just kind of round shapes, like so. Now I'll go ahead and I'll just repeat the same thing I did, and I'll paint these all in. But once again, the way we'll use the brush will be a little different in terms of bringing it in. I'm going to have to turn the brush a little bit to paint in that shape. And the goal is to do that without a lot of brush work, just enough to get it painted in, let it go. So it has a fresh look to it, like it's been brushed in. Okay, pull out paint. Add a little solvent. So this paint layer is fairly thin, but it's not really transparent, but you can see it's a little bit thin because you see some areas where I can see the paper through it a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do all the rest of these. Okay, and then I'll paint the last one here. Okay, so now you have your 6 values. Now, what we're going to do is when we start a painting, instead of thinking of painting one area, then just moving across the painting, from one side to the other, putting all the shapes in and going along in detail, then moving all the way across the painting, we're going to think of starting by blocking in the big design, value design to start with, then adding to that to get to smaller shapes. And then if you want to push it farther to more detail. So it's a different way to think. We're not going from one side of the painting down or even bouncing around. We're going to try to paint in the main design value shapes, okay, for the painting. So what we're going to do here is, here's your 6 value scale, and that's why I had you paint this, is we're going to start with 3 main values. The lightest here, okay, this is a middle value, which is, we'll say, the half tone. And then we're going to we'll start with this dark value. Later, we'll find some super dark little areas. We'll use the really dark black here. But that will be for small little areas. In terms of design, we're going to start with these three main values. So I'm going to go ahead and paint those in, and that will complete this activity so you can see what we're doing. We're painting these values, and you see we're very deliberate about the different values levels of what we're painting. Okay, so I'm going to start with this middle value first. So when we go to start painting, we put that in first because that's the dominant middle tone shape of our painting. And we'll see this later on our next exercise. We'll see how this works. Okay, so there's your middle tone shape. Then I'll paint in the darker tone. Not the super darkest, but a dark tone. And you can see there's enough difference here that you can establish the sense of light and darkness in your painting with these three values to start with. So this is your main your main starting point. And then we'll go down to this very lightest value, mixing in the gel so I can dry my paint. And we mix this one. Now later we're going to talk about a concept of notan, which means black-white. It's just a design based on just black and white, your positive and negative, so to speak, shapes. So the way we could think about that here is that in a design, if you take these middle tone to darkest tone, and that's going to include this up here, right? This in between value. But if we take and start from this middle section all the way to the dark, that would be our darkest dark. And over here is our lightest light. And that would be that black-white design, basic design. Then we break the dark into these dark values, or break the light into the light values. And we're kind of starting kind of midway really through this middle tone, roughly. Okay, depends on how light your painting is going to be and how dark it's going to be. So that this middle could shift in these dark values, from middle to dark value could shift a little bit depending if the painting is very light or it's dark. So here, what I can do is, if I want to just think of that as dark light, I can just pick my black here. Yeah, see, I need a little more medium in here. Okay, that's the one side of the value scale, and the other side is this light here. Okay. Now you could also think of it as a dark value, but not black, and that would give you two main ranges of light to dark in your painting. And then you would add a little accent of darkest, maybe a little accent of the lightest. But the basic idea of the notan is, here are all your darks, here's your lights. Let's start with a basic relationship of shapes. We take and we merge all the shapes, dark and light shapes, into two main areas, and we design with that. Then we break them down to smaller shapes. Okay, so this is the end of this activity, and then we're going to